Destroyer! No! Oh my god! Okay, sorry. Had to start the video on a stupid note because it's me again. Okay, everybody. So, that silliness aside, it's me, Enshohma. The computer just came on for extra lighting. I also have a flashlight so I can do more stupid crap. Repo Man, no! I'm sorry. I've just spent the last month and a half doing an extremely long colorist job for somebody. I finally finished yesterday morning. I am free. Today is Sunday morning. So I'm a little happy. So happy, in fact, that I got this guy with me. The funny thing is, although I am a fan of Japanese monster movies, I don't exactly collect the toys. This guy I found for $1 at a thrift store in the fancy side of town. So, he's the greatest toy ever made! Whoa! Okay, I'll quit it. No, I won't. So, you guys are probably wondering what Enshohma thought about the newest Godzilla movie, the 30th or 29th entry, if you forget about that certain American attempt from 98. 30th film. I'll count that. It's a part of the franchise. I know it's not the true Godzilla, and even Toho kind of separated the character, but it's still a part of the franchise, and that's all that matters. So, what did I think about the movie? I saw it yesterday afternoon with my youngest brother, Gabe. Okay. First up, about spoilers. I personally don't care about spoilers whatsoever. I actually prefer having movies spoiled for me because they always play out differently than when I actually go see them. Rarely have I actually gone in anything not wanting to know spoilers, and life's too short for spoilers, for spoiler free. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to start with just my main thoughts about the movie, and then I'm going to go into heavy spoiler material for the next half hour. And I should warn you, because I'm not as mindful about spoilers as a lot of people are on the internet, to such a point that you can't even tell your girlfriend that the Doctor Who episode has aliens in it, or she freaks out and says, "You just ruined the whole episode for me." Speaking from experience, by the way. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you what I thought about the movie as a whole, sort of give you my final review up front, and then I'm going to go into the nuts and bolts of why I think this way. So, it's good. The new Godzilla movie from Legendary Pictures is good, but a bit underwhelming. If I was to rate it in the 4-star system, it would definitely be a solid 3. Good. But, it definitely is right there. It's not underneath or above. And that's kind of a shame, because even though I did end up liking the movie, and it is a good movie, I had a lot of problems with it. And, okay, this is where we're probably going to get into spoiler material a little bit. Well, not right away. Let me just explain why. I have to admit, I think I made the mistake of spending the last month and a half revisiting all the Godzilla movies, all its connected Japanese science fiction films, like Frankenstein Conquers the World, a 1965 film that is connected to the Godzilla franchise but doesn't have Godzilla in it. Watched a couple of the Gamera movies. I've pretty much just been on a bender of giant monster fun, mostly the Godzilla films. Revisiting them from the very first 54 movie all the way up to Final Wars, which was literally 2 hours before me and Gabe went to the theater. And I think that was kind of a mistake, because I've been spoiled by men in monster suits fighting other men in monster suits across model cities, or men in monster suits fighting marionettes. And the reason I say that is because, say what you will about the old school Japanese monster movies, even the more recent ones made in the 2000s of the Godzilla Millennium era, which was from 1999 to 2004, or if you want to include, 1998 to 2004. Um, the truth is, those, for lack of a better term, low-tech movies, they tend to do a lot more with the fantasy elements and the creature elements and just the spectacle than a lot of big budget Hollywood movies do these days. It's weird. I pretty much have become very harsh towards big budget Hollywood blockbusters and probably modern day filmmaking in general, especially since I have a big love of a lot of the older monster movies and science fiction films in general. And one thing, I know a lot of people disagree with me, one thing I've noticed is that back in the 50s and 60s, you had filmmakers like Eiji Tsuburaya, Hiroshio Honda, George Pal, Ray Harryhausen, Irwin Allen, who had these big ideas, these huge, fantastical ideas, but couldn't really execute them because of the technology and budgets that afforded them back then, that they could afford. Now today, it's the reverse. We have blockbuster summer films, just adjusting my beard, that are so expensive to make that Hollywood, it would not be a surprise if Hollywood is basically a money laundering machine, whether they mean to or not, and that each movie, even romantic comedies, are done on a budget that could save a third world country. And yet, the people they get on these films, or something behind the scenes, like the movies themselves, big budget, we have CGI that can almost do anything you want, but we have producers and writers and directors and marketing people who, unlike the previous mentioned filmmakers, are afraid to, as Mel Brooks would put it, ring that bell as far as the fantasy elements go. For example, Zack Snyder, the man who did the recent Man of Steel movie and is pretty much doing DC Comics right now as films, he's not a bad guy. He might be an actual nice gentleman, but he's kind of a dumbass. Sort of like the kind of guy who is given these big jobs. I don't know. Let's just say a lot of filmmakers these days believe more in tell, don't show, or less is more. And that's mostly because they've been inspired by the likes of Steven Spielberg, or maybe not Albert Hitchcock. Even Albert Hitchcock kind of went there. It's like, go watch The Birds. That's a fantastic monster movie done with a somewhat realistic and eerie presence. But no, it seems like a lot of the newer generations of filmmakers these days don't go there. Or the Hollywood system is afraid that they'll alienate the mainstream audiences, so they kind of dumb it down. The movies are well written. Don't get me wrong. The scripts are well written. There's some nice plots and setup and everything, and good actors and good logic and behind the film stories. But they dumb it down so they don't alienate audiences. And I hate to say it, a lot of modern day movie audiences these days can barely handle fantastical elements unless it's coming from a cartoon or a comic book. And even then, that's like a niche market compared to how massive a lot of the films that are being made these days in Hollywood. Case in point, when I was trying to rant about Zack Snyder earlier, I remember that I was personally annoyed that they got rid of the giant false alien squid from the end of The Watchmen into the live-action movie because they thought it was a little too out there for modern-day movie audiences. But then again, you're dealing with a movie that's sort of a alternate universe of the 1980s, where Nixon is still in charge. There are superheroes all over the place, although Dr. Manhattan's the only one with actual superpowers. And Why not go there? Why not get a little silly and weird? And when movies, big budget Hollywood movies, do get a little silly and weird, it's always in a context where it's acceptable. Like, oh, this was all a dream. Oh, this is in a Matrix type virtual world. It's never fantasy invading the real world, and when it does, it's with lots and lots of compromise. Ghostbusters, really good movie. I appreciate it more that I'm older, but it really shows that outside Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, and whoever the heck was directing the movie, really was afraid and apprehensive with the fantastical elements, the supernatural creatures. So much so that it came very close that the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, one of the most iconic characters from that film and 1980s fantasy cinema in general, almost didn't make the final cut. Because everyone, with the exception of Dan Aykroyd, because he's kind of like me, he's kind of a weirdo, was just utterly terrified that nobody would take it seriously. Thank God the audiences loved the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from test screenings, even with the incompleted special effects. And he ended up in the movie. And he's pretty much one of the main monsters or beloved characters from an already iconic franchise. Now, it's interesting I should bring up Ghostbusters, however, because as a little kid... Now, again, I appreciate the movie way more now than I did back then. But as a little kid, it did kind of bum me out that a lot of the cool ghost monsters were barely on screen most of the time. Now that I'm older, I can appreciate the comedy and the wonderful performances from everybody in that movie. But when you're a little kid, you love the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. You want to see more of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, but he's barely in the movie for 5 minutes. And of course, he almost didn't end up in the movie, which is an even bigger irony. And then as a little kid, I used to watch the Real Ghostbusters cartoon, a series where almost every episode had the Ghostbusters fighting giant Godzilla-sized monsters before I knew what giant Godzilla-sized monsters were. And I always thought as a little kid, why can't there be any live-action movies that are this insane as my cartoons? And this was the late 80s, so even knowing the special effects blockbusters or mega blockbusters were just starting to really come into their own, they weren't as insane as they are now. They still aren't. No. Well, you know what I mean. So, cut to 1990, New Year's Day. My local Channel 13, KCLA, or yeah, just look it up. Actually, I got my computer here. I'll double check. But my local Channel 13 did a Godzilla marathon, starting from the morning to well into the evening, with I believe 9 movies from the Henry H. Saperstein collection of Japanese monster movies, or the ones that are somewhat connected there. The first movie was Godzilla vs. the Thing, followed by Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, War of the Gargantuas, Godzilla's Revenge, Terra Mega Godzilla, Rodan, and it ended the day with Godzilla King of the Monsters. And as a little kid who's never really seen Japanese monster movies, I've heard about them, usually in spoofs from animated shows, but always kind of like underwhelming and undersold it. When I finally saw those live-action movies, especially Godzilla vs. the Thing, aka Mothra vs. Godzilla from 1964, I was blown away. Because you have to remember, there were some really good fantasy films and very imaginative films from the 80s, like Labyrinth, Tron, Return of Oz, the Star Wars trilogy. But those films always took place in their own little worlds, distantly removed from reality. These were make-believe worlds where nothing of consequence had any effect on the real world. So, imagine how amazed I was as a little kid, and even back then I knew it was a guy in a monster suit running around a model set. It's like I wasn't exactly the smartest kid, but I wasn't an idiot either. So you can imagine how impressed and amazed I was that here you have, incredibly fantastical elements of giant monsters, insectoid goddesses, little fairies, magical islands, super weapons, all these things happening in the real world. Granted, it was mid-60s Japan, but it was still affecting the real world. Godzilla was attacking the real world. This wasn't, some faraway intergalactic empire that was affecting a bunch of space humans. This was a giant monster threatening the world. Okay, quick note, the marathon was on KCOP Channel 13. KCOP Channel 13 introduced me to Godzilla and would later, a year later, introduce me to Ultraman through Ultraman Towards the Future, which aired on syndication then. Unfortunately, it's fallen and became the UPN network, and it kind of sucks. But back then, you could, oh god, to be alive back in the early 90s, where they would play all sorts of bizarre movies late at night. I gotta do a whole video on that just to share all kind of memories. But yeah, this Godzilla marathon kind of changed my life. I was outright amazed by the sheer colorful imagination and insanity that was going on with these movies, and not at all being apologetic, not at all trying to find some way to justify the weirdness. And I've yet to see a lot of modern day fantasy movies try to ape that kind of madness. There are rare exceptions. I'm very impressed by a lot of the Marvel Studio movies. But what does this all have to do with the new Godzilla movie? The thing about the giant monster genre is it's not an easy genre to do on the cheap. And when you do it, it ends up as ridiculous as Teenagers from Outer Space. A 1950s movie where the majority of it is a bunch of teenagers from outer space shooting each other with ray guns, and when a giant monster does show up, it's basically a lobster puppet being held in front of the camera in a silhouette type deal. Use your imagination how bad it looks. And then, of course, there's Cloverfield, which was a movie done on a pretty large budget, but they really were apprehensive about showing the monster, so much so that originally the concept was you never saw the monster. Yeah, you saw arms and limbs and you saw the creature, but as far as a prolonged close-up shot of the creature's face, that was never going to originally happen until they got a little more money at the end and they felt a little better about it. It's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man deleted scene all over again. So to my somewhat disappointment, I spent a whole month revisiting all the Japanese monster movies, including the American Godzilla. I pretty much watched all of them with the exception of Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, because I really don't like that movie, and I'll explain in another video. So when I finally saw this new Godzilla movie from Legendary Pictures, with a rather impressive budget of $160 million, probably even more, knowing Hollywood, my heart sank a bit, because it's another big budget Hollywood blockbuster where it's just nothing but apprehension towards the fantasy elements. And what's sad is I think this was deliberate, not in a malicious way, like when you get Michael Bay to do a Transformers movie, and Michael Bay is way less interested in doing the giant robots themselves as characters or even as significant story points, so he, wanders off and focuses on the ridiculous human comedy. That worked great in Pain and Gain, by the way. That was a great movie. I just saw that recently. Michael Bay, if you do more dark colored comedies with idiotic characters with an intelligent script like Pain and Gain, by all means do so, but I don't have much faith in Transformers 4. Okay, yeah, there's dinosaur robots, but so what? That's not going to change the idea that we're going to probably spend 2 hours with the human characters doing silly, stupid crap while the robots are barely in there. And usually, a lot of times this is done because the studio or the effects company can't afford to have the creatures or fantasy elements on screen a lot. Or in the case of somebody like J.J. Abrams, or even, I hate to say, Garth Edwards, they're doing too much of that, tease. That sound, by the way, is my dog. Don't get scared. too much of that visual tease. It's like, I know that they're trying to go for a monster movie that's more engaging on the human level. A monster movie that's probably would appeal to the mainstream. And the mainstream, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's like the best special effects in the world or Teenagers from Outer Space. The concept of giant monsters is beyond them. So much so that everybody loves Cthulhu, but nobody gets Cthulhu. And it's a shame, too, because this movie turned out to be what I did not want the most. This was what I was fearing the most. It's another goddamn origin movie. Another movie where it's almost nothing but setup, and very little payoff. Now, the payoff we do get, the third act of the new Godzilla movie, is fantastic. If you sprinkled that same sort of awesomeness from the last 35 minutes throughout the rest of the movie, even if you didn't have giant monster fight scenes, this would probably be a much better movie. But as it is, it's just teasing and apprehension. And I don't think they did it maliciously. They did it on purpose, but not maliciously. This is, again, not Michael Bay getting bored of the robots and then focusing on something else. This is more like what J.J. Abrams did with that ridiculous Super 8 movie, where he's so desperately trying to ape the Spielberg aesthetic, the stereotypical Spielberg aesthetic, that the fantasy elements themselves suffer horribly. To such a point that you almost never get a clear look of the monsters until you get into the final act of the movie. And that sucks too, because there are some really spectacular scenes that we constantly keep pulling away from. Every time something gets really interesting, we pull away from it to focus on the human characters. And it's a shame too, because I'm one of the few giant monster movie fans who like the human characters, who loves engaging humans in my monster movies. Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. That movie needs more monster action. But at the same time, I'm completely entertained because I love the human characters. I love the situation that you have this island of castaways dealing with a mysterious terrorist organization that also happens to have giant monsters in it. If the giant monster action sequences were more prolonged and there was more Godzilla footage in it, it'd be a perfect monster movie. As it stands, it's an underrated movie that's often gets overlooked. Literally, it's underrated and overlooked. It's not one and the same. Sorry, my throat's dry. So, the thing about this movie... Okay, now I'm going to go into heavy spoiler territory. Again, really good cast. The human characters are quite engaging. Even the bland ones. Our main character... Sorry, I'm going to have to pull up the Wikipedia just to get the names of the characters. Here I am talking about engaging human characters, and I can't, for the life of me, remember any of their names other than Brody this and Brody that. Forgive me, I'm old, I can't remember every character's name, and giant monster names are a little easier to remember than people's names. So unless you're Glenn Manning or Nancy Flora Archer. Get that reference. So, okay, I'm not having a good time. I do not multitask. Multitasking is a lie, and even if it was real, I would suck at it, as would you. So, the human characters and the actors they've got to play the get for this new movie, they're good. They are all good. Some far stronger than others. And sadly, those who are far stronger than the rest are barely in the movie. I love Ken Watanabe. I love Bryan Cranston. It's a shame that they're side characters to Aaron Taylor Johnson, who plays blah blah blah, looking for cast, Lieutenant Ford Brody. Now, unlike the other reviewers and fans of the movie, I don't think he was that boring of a character. He's actually competent. It's like you're leading man material. But it's a problem I find in a lot of Hollywood movies where they always pick the most bland, or, for lack of a better term, and forgive me, whitest character imaginable to be the lead character, while the side characters are way more interesting and developed enough that they could carry the movie. And I don't like disaster movies, but the best disaster movies are the ones where you have a wide variety of different characters, and you do go back to each and every one of them in their own little side stories. As opposed to a disaster movie that follows one guy and one guy alone, and all the other characters just, barely connect to him, and are just, that's the problem I had with World War Z, as well as a problem I had with, movies like 2012. And no offense, it's like, even though when Roland Emmerich kind of screwed up Godzilla back in '98, as far as a visual director, he not only goes and rings the bell of insanity, but he's really good at, staging these sequences, which is funny because going back to director Garth Edwards, he, long before he did Monsters, which was sort of his big independent break that got him the job on Godzilla, he was the Roland Emmerich of BBC produced documentaries. In fact, I had more confidence going into this theater than everyone else was, because I'm familiar with his old work. Unfortunately, the only documentary I can think of is End Days, which is a very unique documentary where it's basically 5 different end-of-the-world scenarios played out with the same group of characters, the same day and time, but done over supposedly alternate versions of Earth. So you have the viral end of the world. You have Yellowstone exploding into a volcanic eruption. You have a flood taking out all of New York. Stuff like that. And it's funny, too, because the reason I bring up End Days is they actually do... Garth Edwards actually uses some of the visual gags from the flood sequence from that documentary into Godzilla. Most notably, the only survivors who were lucky enough to get inside a building before the flood hits. That was directly taken from End Days, except in End Days nobody really made it and the glass didn't hold for long. Now we're in spoiler territory. I warned you, if you're still whining about it, it's your fault. Destroyer agrees with me, isn't it right, buddy? So, I had confidence with Garth Edwards. The man can pull off destruction and mayhem. Unfortunately, unlike his documentary work, he went with what he did in Monsters, where the monsters are barely off screen, you don't see the fantasy elements, and again, it's way too much aping the stereotypical Steven Spielberg aesthetic, which sucks because Steven Spielberg, yes, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a magnificent movie. It does a great job building the mystery, and the payoff, the last half an hour of that movie is fantastic. But he didn't do that in each and every one of his movies. If he did, Indiana Jones would be 2 hours of us trying to of Indiana Jones deciding what hat he's going to buy. No, Indiana Jones is a full-on adventure movie. Duel, a movie from the 70s, that's a fantastic movie. If you've never seen it, rent it. It's like it's a 2-hour car chase, but it's well done. Yes, we don't see the truck driver in that movie, which is a really eerie and creepy addition to the whole story. It's basically a man versus this unseen murderer driving a giant pickup truck. But stuff happens. Action happens. We see things. With this new Godzilla movie, it's almost like a spoof of a Spielberg movie. Interesting things happen, but we barely see it. Or we keep pulling back to the human characters. My dog needs to go out. I'll continue this in part 2. Alright. Yeah, there we are. This is a terrible video. I'll see you guys in a little bit.